Hello, I am a boy from the Ming Dynasty in China. I will never forget the year 1630 when the sky over Shaanxi seemed to be scorched red by the wrath of the gods. I was 16 then, a stout young man who knew how to plow the fields and was just beginning to feel shy when watching the neighbor's daughter wash silk by the river. The great drought lasted for 3 consecutive years, turning my homeland into a living hell. The land was cracked like a turtle's shell, swallowing every drop of sweat and tear. My father and I dug through all the barren hills, looking for roots, elm bark, and finally, white clay to fill the terribly cramping stomachs of my mother and sister. But human endurance has its limits. My father fell ill from exhaustion and hunger. The debt for rice seeds borrowed from Old Master Zhao the previous season had compounded interest upon interest, becoming a monstrous entity crushing the family's hope of survival. I vividly remember that morning, with the north wind whipping my face. I saw my father gasping for breath on the straw bed, and my bone-thin mother feeding water spoon by spoon to my sister. I stood up, clenching my fists. I was the man of the house. I couldn't watch them slowly die. I decided to do the one thing a proud man like me had always considered the ultimate shame: sell myself. I walked to the Zhao Manor by myself. No one led me. My own bare, cracked feet took heavy steps all the way there. Standing before the fat steward, I gritted my teeth and kowtowed onto the cold brick floor. A deed of self-sale was drafted right on the tea table. It wasn't collateral for a few years, but a complete permanent sale. The price of a 16-year-old boy in his prime was 30 dao of white rice and the clearing of the old debt. I bit my finger and pressed my print onto the paper. The red blood spread, as red as my eyes were then. They threw me a set of coarse ash-gray clothes. Since I was grown and strong, I was not given the easy tasks like the young houseboys. On the very first day, I was thrown into the heaviest labor group. That winter was the coldest of my life, not because of the heavy snow, but because of the loneliness and humiliation. My job was splitting firewood and carrying coal. Every day, I had to wake up at the 4th watch, about 1 a.m., when frost still covered the ground. My bare hands held the freezing iron axe. Every swing sent a jolt of pain up to my aching shoulders. The wood chunks were rock hard. If I wasn't careful, splinters would tear my hands apart. But the most painful task was carrying hot water and glowing charcoal to serve the master's rooms. I remember once, while carrying 2 buckets of hot water across the corridor, I slipped on the icy floor. Boiling water splashed onto my left leg, scalding pain piercing my heart. But I didn't dare cry out, quickly gritting my teeth to stand up and wipe the floor clean for fear of dirtying the eldest young master's path. That burn later festered, and I was racked with fever for 3 days and nights in the damp, moldy storage room. In my delirium, I still dreamed of running on the golden barley fields, free and proud, only to wake up to the reality of 4 dark earthen walls and the stench of the stable. Summer arrived with sweltering heat and grueling farm work. As a new slave, the overseer forced me to work twice as hard as others, calling it discipline. When my throat was parched, I only dared to duck my head into the ditch for a mouthful of muddy water, all while watching the master's family relaxing in the pavilion, eating watermelon. This disparity was like a knife slicing at the self-respect of a young man coming of age. I once wanted to run away. But then the image of my mother and sister eating their fill, thanks to the rice I traded for, appeared, chaining my feet to the shackles. I learned to bow lower. I learned to hide the look of defiance, replacing it with feigned obedience. I realized that here, to survive, personal pride was the first luxury that had to be discarded. I turned into a silent ox, toiling relentlessly from dawn until dusk, just to earn 2 meals of leftovers and a dry place to sleep. That was how I grew up, a twisted, painful maturation in the shell of a slave. When I was 22, Old Master Zhao noticed my great strength and quiet demeanor, free of petty thieving, so he decided to promote me to Wufu, the slave troop, specializing in escorting goods. Don't mistake that for an honor. It was essentially offering my life as a shield for the master's silver ingots. I was given an iron-tipped rosewood staff and a short knife tucked into my belt. My mission was to follow the convoy transporting silk and herbal medicine from Shaanxi to the north. Those were the final years of the Ming Dynasty. The land was in chaos, uprisings flared everywhere, and it was hard to distinguish between Imperial troops and bandits. Every trip meant stepping one foot into the gates of death. I will never forget the journey through the Taihang Mountains that autumn. Torrential rain for 3 days and nights turned the clay road into a giant mire. The carriage wheels were stuck, sinking up to the axles. I and the other slaves had to put our shoulders to it, using all our strength to push. Mud mixed with horse manure splattered our faces, and the icy rainwater soaked our coarse cotton clothes, clinging to our skin. The snap of the steward's leather whip lashed the air, urging us on like cattle. Just as we were most exhausted, a terrifying horn sound echoed from the cliff face. Bandits poured down like a flash flood. They didn't speak much, their gleaming blades aimed straight at the precious cargo. The master instantly hid trembling under the carriage. Only us slave warriors were left. I knew that if the goods were lost, we would be beaten to death or sold into the coal mines upon return. The fear of the master was greater than the fear of death before my eyes. I roared, charging at the nearest bandit. The rosewood staff in my hand swung hard, breaking the arm holding his knife. I fought like a wounded beast, not out of loyalty, but out of a miserable instinct for survival. We saved the goods in that battle. 5 bandits died, and 2 of our fellow slaves also lay permanently by the roadside, hastily covered with a few shovels of dirt. Back at the manor, old Master Zhao rewarded me with a jar of wine and a bowl of braised meat. I sat in the corner of the stable, chewing the fatty meat while letting the quack doctor sprinkle powder on my wounds. I realized that my life, in their eyes, was only worth a successful delivery and a full meal. When I turned 25, old Master Zhao granted me another favor. He matched me with Xuan Hoa, a maid working in the kitchen, whose face was heavily pockmarked from smallpox, but whose eyes held deep sorrow. Don't think it was a joyous occasion. There were no red firecrackers, no celebratory wine. The steward simply threw us a ragged mat and pointed to a dilapidated straw-thatched hut next to the ox stable. From now on, you 2 live there and breed tirelessly for the master's benefit. I understood the master's calculation. They wanted to create household-born slaves, children born into servitude, serving the Zhao family for generations without the cost of purchase. We were like 2 livestock penned together for breeding. But within that misery, Xuan Hoa and I brought warmth to each other. She secretly hid burnt scraps of bread and leftover soup from the kitchen to bring me after grueling workdays. I patched up the leaky roof so she wouldn't get wet when it rained. Our first child was born on a whistling winter night. Its cry echoed in the shabby hut like a needle piercing my heart. I looked at the red-faced infant, my heart writhing with ultimate pain. My child was born without its father's surname. It would carry the master's name. It would not be educated, nor would it be free to run and play. From the moment it drew its first breath, its destiny was set as one who bows his head. That was the heaviest yoke, chaining me permanently to this manor. I couldn't run away, for now I had hostages. Not long after, the old master passed away. The eldest young master took charge. He was far more ruthless and meticulous than his father. I, by then a middle-aged man weathered by life, was promoted to steward of the storehouse. I no longer had to endure rain and sun while escorting goods, but the mental burden was heavier. I held the ledger, managing the newly bought slaves. I saw my former self in the fearful eyes of the 15 or 16-year-olds. But tragically, to survive and keep food on the table for my wife and children, I was forced to become cruel. I yelled when they were slow. I wielded the whip when they broke things. I became the extended arm of the master, pouring oppression onto those more wretched than myself. Some nights, looking at my calloused hands, I felt disgust for myself. I had transformed into a ferocious watchdog, tearing at my own kind in exchange for the master's satisfaction. The self-sale debt from years ago, plus the cost of medicine, food, and lodging for my wife and children over the years, was recalculated by the eldest young master. The debt had grown so large that I never dared to dream of the words, "Buy back my freedom," again. I accepted the truth. I was a rotting tree, my roots deep in the mire of the Zhao Manor, unable to be uprooted. My life thus drifted on, slowly eroded by every ledger page and the master's reprimands, waiting for my end. The years passed mercilessly. Old wounds from my time as an escort began to take their toll. Rheumatism gnawed at my knees and finger joints every time the weather changed. I could no longer hold the whip to manage the slaves, nor was I sharp enough to calculate the storehouse accounts. In the eyes of the eldest young master, now a stately master himself, I had devolved from an effective watchdog into a useless waste of food. I was stripped of my stewardship, relegated to guarding the abandoned side gate on the west side of the garden, which was only used for taking out manure and trash. My dwelling was a temporary hut built of rotten wood, with the wind blowing through every corner. The greatest tragedy of old age was not hunger, but separation. Xuan Hoa, my hard-working wife who shared my slave fate, passed away last winter. She died from overwork and a fever with no medicine. I remember that afternoon. She lay on the pile of straw, her breath rattling like a broken bellows, her rough hand clutching mine, unable to utter a final word. The death of an old maidservant didn't disturb anyone in the manor. The steward simply threw me a tattered mat. I, with my back bent almost to the ground, bound my wife's body myself, placed it on the wheelbarrow I once used to carry manure, and silently pushed her to the graveyard for slaves on the desolate hillside. There was no tombstone, no incense burner. I only managed to pile up a small mound of earth and stick a dry branch in it as a marker. Half a lifetime we leaned on each other for warmth, and now only I was left, facing the four cold walls. And our children? That was the most agonizing pain. The eldest son, being quick and clever, was taken by the master to serve in the capital, and has been unheard of for 10 years. The winter of the 8th year of Kangxi came early and harsher than previous years. Heavy snow fell, covering my leaky hut's roof in white. The northern cold was like sharp blades slipping through the worn cotton-padded jacket with its exposed stuffing, cutting into my wrinkled purple skin. My legs were completely paralyzed. I couldn't walk anymore. Day after day, I lay huddled on the straw bed, waiting for someone to bring the thin, leftover gruel from the kitchen. Some days the snow was too deep. No one bothered to come to the back garden. I had to starve, scraping snow from the doorway into my mouth to quench my thirst. My aging body shivered violently in spasms, my nearly toothless jaws chattering. Tonight is New Year's Eve. From the direction of the luxurious main house, the boom of firecrackers, the sounds of laughter and celebration, the smell of roast meat, and the rich scent of glutinous rice wine drifted on the wind all the way to this foul-smelling corner. That excitement belonged to the world of free people, while I was just a forgotten shadow on the fringe of the festivities. In the delirium of approaching death, the ache in my bones suddenly vanished. Before my eyes was no longer the darkness of the hut, but the bright sunlight of the barley field in my hometown of Shaanxi years ago. I saw myself again at 16, running barefoot on the warm earth. I saw my parents standing and waving at the edge of the village, calling my name. Hot tears streamed from my cloudy eyes, rolling down my sunken cheeks, and quickly turned cold. I smiled, a distorted yet relieved smile. Finally, the debt of this life was paid in full. That deed of self-sale was worthless now. No one could order me around. No one could beat me anymore. I closed my eyes. My soul felt weightless, soaring up and over the towering walls of the Zhao Manor, flying towards the fields of freedom in my memory. That was the end of a slave's life.